It's time for the Little Agency That Roars podcast, a podcast that connects you with talented and brilliant people. And that's all of us. We are available wherever you stream your podcast, so go ahead and find us and subscribe. I'm your host, Michael Fasoni, and let's get started. Okay, it's time for the Little Agency That Roars podcast, a place for talented and brilliant people, and that's all of us. I'm sitting here with Will Reuter. Will, how are you?
Michael, I'm great. Good to be with you, man.
It's great to have you here.
Well, it's good to be here.
It took you a little bit to get you here. Well, not so much getting you here, just, you're a very busy person.
Well, the world needs housing. Kansas City needs housing. I'm not a guy on a job site, but I'm just trying to make things happen.
And you do. And I do want to mention this is our first video episode.
It's always good to be number one, right?
Yeah. Super stoked to have you as the first video episode. Super excited to have the video capability now. Find us wherever you find podcasts, basically everywhere. And of course, video will live on YouTube.
Well, that's good. I always tell people I've got a face for radio. So this is kind of merging both of those worlds, right? It's kind of radio, but also kind of video. So
it is.
We'll see how I feel about this.
It is. Have you done a podcast before?
I have done podcasts before for others. Yeah, as guests. Yeah.
Multiples?
Not as many as I think I'm capable of, certainly, but it's the new medium with which to communicate with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And you can't always communicate all of the things you need to communicate in 30-second or 60-second sound bites. So
exactly.
Some things just require a little bit more depth. So podcasts are a great way to get more information, deeper information to a broader number of people.
And that's one of the reasons why, I wanted to start this. Tim and I wanted to start this is because a lot of times you listen to an interview and it's very aggravating when they say, "Hey, Will, we have 15 more seconds. What can you tell us about, the new initiative for the KCHBA?" Well, gosh, what if he had 15 more minutes?
Right.
Let alone 15 seconds.
Right.
That's not fair for you, not fair for the audience. But all that aside, let's talk about Will Reuter.
Oh, this is my least favorite topic.
So I have a lot of questions, but like I tell all of our guests, this is your time, your show. And even though Carrie's here sitting right next to you now, I hope that doesn't limit what you say or affect what you say. But is there anything you want to talk about aside from what I may or may not ask you? Just something you're burning to get out. Not related to KCHBA, could be about whatever, anything.
I literally get paid to talk about housing. It is the thing that I, really care most about. It's the thing I recognize that everybody experiences as a human condition is everyone needs a place to sleep at night. And so it's really the thing that I try to focus all of my interactions on is how do I tie it back to that condition about where people sleep. As far as like any breaking news about myself or anything like that, I'm a pretty open book. So there's nothing I think that I could share that would be the most interesting thing of all time that would allow people to stop listening to the podcast at this moment because they know everything there is to know about me. So I'm excited to have an opportunity to talk about housing. I joke that if there is a crowded elevator, I can get a housing conversation going in that 30 seconds. We're probably not going to be able to solve anything, but if I can leave somebody thinking about housing or home ownership in a way that they previously hadn't before, I think that's the only place to start. I mean, everyone's grand wish in life would be, I only have to say something once and everyone's going to agree with me and act on it. Mm-hmm. That's just not the way it works. It's not the way it works in the political world. It's not the way it works in our relationships. It takes time and it takes thought and people are busy. And so the more that we talk about things, and the more that we talk about things with different people in different ways, the more relative we can make all of our conversations to the point where somebody maybe understands something better than what they did coming into that interaction.
That was nicely articulated.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give people the opportunity to talk about really whatever they want because it doesn't always have to be topical. It doesn't always have to be related to what your industry is or what you know.
Well, if you're looking for a little bit of bio that you won't find on any of my social media presence, which is relatively limited by design, I love to cook. And that was really born out of my experience in public policy, where you will work on something for years and years and years, and maybe it does or does not become law. But I think we all yearn for kind of a sense of accomplishment in
Mhm.
life. And so at that period in my career where you just beat your head against a wall for something that made so much sense to you, but you couldn't ever get enough people to agree that that was the right thing to do, um, I kind of took up cooking, and where I just have this table full of ingredients that I went into the store and bought, and at the end of it, I had a meal, and I was like, "Man, I did that. That's awesome." And I'm full now, and I can go to bed, and I can get up and beat my head against the wall for 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours, or some of those 24-hour shifts on Capitol
Okay.
Hill that I used to do.
Okay.
So
See,
I love to cook. I love food. I've never had anything that I wouldn't ask for seconds for, because I am the founder, president, and all-time leader in the Happy Plate Club. I love it all. So if anybody's listening to this and like, oh man, Will, you got to try this, please reach out to me at my email address or any of the phone numbers that are listed out there and tell me what I should try in Kansas City.
let's come back to cooking
Okay.
because I want to. You jumped in very passionately, as you always are, about housing. So, where are you in the KCHBA currently with that particular initiative?
So when we're talking about housing and we're talking about what it takes to make housing happen, which is really what the entire housing conversation comes down to today. When we're talking about cost or we're talking about diversity of price or diversity of product, it's really about supply. We need more of everything. Somebody says, well, we need more affordable housing. Absolutely. How do we get that? More housing, period. We can't really self-select the type of housing that a community or a county or a state or a country is going to only allow to be built. We need
Right.
it all.
Right.
And so, we have kind of shifted our entire organization to be the champion for home ownership. Historically, I think people saw Home Builders Association. Those guys are the shills for builders and developers. That's all they care about. Well, that's true, but housing is built and developed by these very companies, Kansas City companies, local companies. And if there are no buyers, there are no builders. And if there are no builders, there won't be any buyers. So it really is a symbiotic relationship. So we're putting ourselves on the same side of the table as those who are seeking out new housing options in
Hmm.
Kansas City. And that's why our new tagline is home ownership for all.
Hmm.
Now, is a 100% home ownership rate a probability? Probably not. But those things that we can do to put people on a path to home ownership earlier on in their life is the kind of thing that we're going to support as an organization.
And what specifically are you able to perform within the KCHBA to further that? And it's probably working with local municipalities. And I want to go into your history because there's a lot of that there. Um, but go ahead if you can.
Really, this is about awareness of the role that local governments play in what kind of housing can be offered in their community. Housing is one of those industries, maybe really the only industry, certainly the largest and most important industry that is regulated at the most hyper local level. What city councils say will and will not be allowed in their community plays an outsized role in what the local housing market looks like. We don't have necessarily federally regulated housing. There are elements of the housing stock that are, built through federal programs or administered through housing and urban development.
Mhm.
But when we look at all of these extenuating circumstances and all of the variables that have to come into focus and into alignment for housing to happen, a lot of those pieces can and should be put in place by local entities. So it's allowing people to recognize the local role in housing and allowing them to embrace it and incentivizing them and encouraging them to not just say, well, housing is a big, meaty, complex topic. It's too big to swallow. So we're just going to do what we think we can do or what we think might help a little, but we're not really going to tackle the issue. So some of this is just breaking down the barriers that may mentally or psychologically exist to say, these are things we can do today that are not going to solve the problem, but it might make it a little bit better. And that's really what we're after, is not this one bill or one ordinance or one statute you can put in place that's going to solve all of the issues related to housing. It's, let's take these small steps that we can all agree on and then measure the progress and keep working our way forward. The housing market that we have today isn't the result of one policy decision by one legislative body at one point in time. It is an amalgamation and a composition of housing policy that's been, and housing decisions that have been made for decades. And so we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking, well, we can't undo 50, 60, 70 years of housing policy with one bill, so we shouldn't even try. We do need to start trying, and it's going to take time to unwind some of those bad decisions, or the things that we learn just simply don't work as they intended. You know, the universe is sometimes governed by the law of unintended consequences. And so we want to make sure that we don't just see, well, that was an unintended consequence, I guess that's just the way it is. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. We can make those modifications, we can make those improvements, we can grow, we can learn. The industry evolves each and every day. We're not building the same thing we built 5 years ago, and we're not building the same thing. We won't be building the same thing in 5 years that we're building today.
Right.
That's just the way housing works. And so we shouldn't have the policies that we had 10, 15, 20 years ago, 100 years ago with regard to housing. So those things need to be modernized as well, and we can work in tandem with one another to get us into a better place.
So this is the conversation you have to have often and repeatedly with multiple local entities, regional, national.
Absolutely. This is
All the
this is a
above?
federal, state, and local conversation. The Kansas City HBA, we cover a landmass, a geographic area within our territorial jurisdiction that covers 69 different permitting entities. So 69 different iterations of a development code, a building code, a plan review, inspection regime, whatever. And so each one of those entities is situated differently. So
Real
it really
quick,
is
how
a
does that
hyper-
compare to other cities?
So
If we're at 69, are some at, are we high? Are we low? Are we the median?
we're pretty high, and
Okay.
part of that is due to the fact that Kansas and Missouri are two of only 6 states in the entire country for which there are no statewide construction standards. So we do all of our building and development at the most hyper local level in the states of Kansas and Missouri. So you go down to Oklahoma or Nebraska or Colorado, and they have some statewide construction standards, meaning that there is either a statewide building code where everything's built to the same standard, and city governments don't have a say in, you know, what the insulation value is in the wall or
Okay.
the ceiling. And so that really creates even more importance for an entity like the HBA to help communities navigate all of those nuances in construction and to help them understand, okay, you've got housing goals, you've got a stated desire to have either better, different, or more or fewer housing options in your community. What does that look like from a practical standpoint for what we're seeing, what the industry can provide, what it's going to be able to provide, what products are available, what labor force is in place to accomplish these things? And so it's almost like trench warfare around Kansas City, and going jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And even then, these city councils are not a monolith. There are elected members from
Right.
the community, and they all have different experiences and different backgrounds and different feelings about things. So it's really down not only to the most hyper local level, but it's very individualistic.
Well, and they rotate.
Absolutely.
That person isn't going to be at that position for 10 years.
And then you add in the fact that Missouri now has term limits at the local level. So you're really talking about 8 years, 2 4-year terms to fully grasp a topic like this, to legislate on it. And then by the time you get comfortable with it, you learn the vernacular and know kind of how this stuff works, you're statutorily required to sit out. So it's going to be
on your side of the table, it's going to take you 1 to 2 years just to get their attention.
right.
And I could be wrong, correct?
Yeah,
me.
I mean,
But-
you can teach somebody advanced mathematics, but you got to teach them 2 + 2 = 4 first. And
Right.
if that's where you're starting, and
Right.
you get them coached up, and you get them to kind of understand some of the economics, some of the constants within home building. And then you're ready for another class, and you're back to 2 + 2 = 4. So it's one of those things where we just want to be that resource for people to actively seek out the HBA's perspective and the experience that exists within the industry. The HBA has been in existence for more than 80 years. We've been doing parades of homes in Kansas City since 1947. And so there are decades. I mean, if you compile all of the experience together, probably millennia of experience within the industry that can help inform future housing decisions. And that's all we ask, is that if there's a table at which housing is being discussed in these communities, that you just save us a seat and we can participate in that discussion.
You said there were one of how many cities or states that don't have a
So
statewide,
Kansas and Missouri are two of only six.
two of six.
hmm
And I'm sure that's a lobby effort or a political effort, or is that just by because no one had a seat at the table representing Kansas and Missouri? Why are we one of six?
Well, we are very, both Kansas and Missouri were sort of founded on that. Hey, decisions are best made at the local level. So
Okay.
having access to the policymakers who are making these decisions, home rule has always been kind of a very attractive thing, to where it's not people in Topeka or Jefferson City dictating, precisely what happens in those communities. So it's pretty cultural, and you'll see that those six states are largely rural states, or at least significantly rural.
Makes sense.
Like they've got large land masses and relatively small populations. And so, what is good to be built in Overland Park, Kansas, is probably not going to be required in Goodland, Kansas,
hmm
on the Colorado line. And the same, in on the Missouri side. What's good for Jackson County is probably not going to work in the Boot Heel.
Sure. Sure. So is there an advantage maybe to the builder not having that regulation? And I think that answer is obvious, but I don't want to believe that it's obvious.
Well, it has certainly, I think, contributed to the home builder, um, I guess, structure within the Kansas City metro, because there are so many jurisdictions with so many different nuances between jurisdictions. It's really hard to achieve the economies of scope and scale by building in a lot of different jurisdictions with all of the overhead that would be required to comply with all of those little small changes. And in a place like Kansas City,
Uh,
you can have a neighbor that lives across the street that's in a different community. And so if you're a builder in that neighborhood and you've got, you're building on both sides of the street, you could be subject to two different regulatory regimes.
mhm.
And so I think, historically what's happened is Kansas City contractors have largely, done 3 or 4 or 5 jurisdictions and kind of just known and owned those and built relationships there. And it's really, kind of kept people siloed off from other areas of the metro to go explore building and developing in. And so, Kansas City has always been a very fragmented home builder market, meaning that we've got a lot of home builders building by relative means in other cities, fewer numbers of houses. So, if the average home builder in Kansas City is building, 25, 30 homes a year, it's a much smaller percentage of homes being built by home building companies than perhaps other markets. One of the other markets I look at pretty closely, because geographically, demographically, very similar to ours, is Indianapolis. And Indianapolis has what we would refer to as national builders, builders that build all over the country, and they build tens of thousands of homes. Um, and the top 12 builders in Indianapolis do something like 70% of the permitting activity. So 70% of the new construction is done by a dozen companies, with the rest of the 30%, mostly being custom homes. Whereas in Kansas City, our top 10 builders probably do about 20% of the overall permitting.
Mm.
So I think the regulatory structure here has contributed in some degree to, who can make a living home building in Kansas City.
Is it better to have a builder that is building nationally versus a builder that's only building regionally or in one city? And I'm
No.
asking that maybe because, not only is every city different economically, but every city is different um, in terms of climate.
Absolutely.
We talk about we have more freezes and thaws, more wet freezes and thaws in Kansas City than New York or Denver. New York may have more freezes and thaws, but aren't associated much with moisture. Uh,
We still have four very distinct seasons in Kansas City, and that does present a challenge to build, one house that's going to perform adequately in all four of those seasons.
right.
So it is a bit of more of a moving target. So, that could certainly be part of the calculus about, why there, is less of a presence of those large either national or regional builders in Kansas City. I think that when you look at, some other markets, they don't necessarily have the degree of fractionalization that we do. Many other local jurisdictions will permit at the county level, whereas we've got multiple permitting jurisdictions within individual counties. So, I wouldn't come here and say that, we necessarily need to change that, but cooperation between jurisdictions, harmonizing some of these things or at least speaking the same language would go a long way to retaining, that local control over the construction standards. Without necessarily saying, well, we're just going to let somebody else handle this because it's gotten too complex, or
Hmm.
we just are going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and do something completely different. So, you know, it's different home builders bring different products to the market. Kansas City has always been a market from a consumer standpoint that has embraced individuality, and it's not that there haven't been um, national builders in Kansas City before, but their business model is kind of a uh, more standardized home building where the options for the home buyer are more limited, and that's how that's how they've modeled their business. So it's not saying that's good or bad. It's just different than what we've currently got in Kansas City. And so I think, if you had a room full of 30 builders and you said, raise your hand if you let your buyer change your plans before you start the construction process. I bet most of them, if not all of them, would raise their hand, and they want to build what the customer wants.
Hmm.
And that wouldn't be true in a lot of other markets where they just say,
Okay.
hey, this is the house, take it or leave it.
Hmm. How often are you talking to other cities in their home builders associations so that you have an idea of what other cities are doing?
Oh, we talk very frequently. There are more than 600 local HBAs around the country, home builders associations
Hmm.
and of various sizes in different markets. Kansas City has always historically been a top 20 in size in terms of HBA, so we're relatively large
Really?
compared to some of our counterparts. I mean, you've got HBAs like Raleigh Durham that have like 22 or 2300 members. I mean, just massive organizations. And then you've got, HBAs that have 30 members. So
Okay.
it's a big range. And so within the National Association of Home Builders, that large apparatus, think about it in terms of government. You've got your federal, state, and local government. Well, we've got federal, state, and local home builders associations. So the within the NAHB apparatus, there is an executive officers council where I can talk with my peers very frequently about what they're seeing in their markets. What are you experiencing? And so it's great because we're not competitors. We're trying to learn from each
Right.
other, trying to do better things.
Right.
We've got territories that we are responsible for, but they're not in competition with one another. I don't make any more money, and my organization isn't better served if I find myself in competition with St. Louis. That doesn't make any sense because we're
Right.
after the same thing. We're serving a different market
Hmm.
with our own membership, and so we do information sharing all the time.
That's nice to hear.
Well, housing is one of those things where it's universally necessary, but it is universally misunderstood. So we want to make sure that we've got that open line of communication where if something good and something interesting is happening somewhere else, that we can explore whether or not, we should bring that here. So, we would never say, oh, we're not going to admit a national home builder to the HBA in Greater Kansas City. That's couldn't be further from the truth. We want to make sure that anybody that is willing to invest in putting roofs over people's heads, they've got a place at the HBA.
Can you give an example, Will, of a tip or a trick or something, a policy that's been implemented in another city or state that you've brought over to Kansas City or tried to bring over to Kansas City?
I guess I could elaborate a little bit on, some of the things that we've shared
Okay.
with other jurisdictions. Anytime there is a code adoption process that occurs in another jurisdiction, another state, I usually get a phone call. And the reason is because the HBA has always historically invested in sending our members to International Codes Council meetings. So we knew that that was going to be important to at least have an awareness of what was being discussed at those code adoption hearings, just so we knew what was coming down the pike. And so I will get phone calls and emails saying, "Hey, the new code is coming out. What are your guys saying about it? And what how do you do your cost analysis?" So we share all of those that what you would call intellectual property. I mean, I don't know if property is the right word because I give it away for free and I'll give it to anybody that asks. And in fact, I send it to people who don't ask. But it's good to have a network of people that recognize that you've got something to bring to the table. And
Hmm.
so that's pretty typical of Kansas City, though. We export a lot of great things. We've got a great reputation. We're right in the middle of the country, and it's great to be able to offer that what I guess some people would call it expertise. I don't really feel like an expert on much, but if people are seeking you out and they think you have something to offer, then we offer that without hesitation. You know, One thing that I have borrowed is some of these different regulatory approaches with regards to affordable housing. The main topic of discussion when you talk about housing, being the first time home buyer, what is being brought online that is going to be more attainable for someone who's just getting started in their home buying timeline. And there are a number of different structures from a regulatory standpoint that you could pass at the state level or something that an individual city council could adopt. So I harvest those from all over the country, and you've got to localize those. You've got to make them customized to the demographics and the culture and the financial capabilities of what jurisdiction you're looking to migrate that into. But it's just good to know that chances are if you've got an idea on housing, somebody else has had it first and
Hmm.
they've explored it.
Hmm.
So there's very little, novel concepts out there with
Right.
regard to housing. But you try to learn from other people's mistakes. And maybe if they'd have done this or that, it would have actually maybe gotten more traction. So yeah, we share those ideas
The
all the
Shark
time.
Tank for
Yeah,
housing.
that's right. That's right. It's much less glamorous than what you might see on TV.
um, so how often, because you bring the question up for myself, is the local Kansas Cityan reaching out to you?
Like the individual would-be home buyer
Yeah,
or
correct.
just the
Yes.
average citizen.
Yes. Thank you.
It is it certainly picked up during the pandemic when
Uh-huh.
you went through all of the craziness associated with housing. People are trying to figure out, hey, what do these, dimensional lumber numbers mean for me? Lumber went up, more than 1,000% in a relatively short period of time. How is that going to affect this? So they were seeking that information out related to housing because the home buyer today is more informed probably than they've ever been.
Hmm.
But the pandemic, I think, helped people realize that you really can't take housing for granted. Housing maybe from the outside looking in always just kind of happened.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden there wasn't enough of it and it was a scramble and you got in
Hmm.
bidding wars and people had to pay more attention to it. And so they were reading national headlines. They were reading stuff, on social media, and they were just seeking out a local source of housing information. And I think that experience is largely what contributed to my organization's desire to put ourselves out there as that source of information. So as we go through, a new communications effort to more accurately, more frequently, and consistently communicate housing topics to the broader public, we hope it generates more questions and thoughts.
But you are getting these calls weekly.
Yeah, and the phones typically start ringing a little bit more at the advent of the parade of homes. Hey, when are
Okay.
the guidebooks going to be available? Or,
Okay.
those kinds of things. But we'll get questions from people like, "Hey, I want to build a house. What do I need to do?" So
Hmm.
there are resources like Home Building 101. Like these are the questions to ask. Here's some checklists to consider
Okay.
as you look through this. But one of our most frequent responses to questions like that is to go ask a home builder. They're going to tell you exactly what needs to have happen. And if they can't deliver what it is that you're describing, they'll refer you over to someone that they know can.
Isn't it likely they may get a different answer, home builder to home builder, though,
Oh,
for the reason
absolutely.
you stated?
Absolutely. And home builders are not a monolith. They're all trying to differentiate themselves
Hmm.
between, what their competitors are out in the market. And somebody that builds something similar but not identical, every buyer's different. So every home builder is
Sure.
bringing stuff different. So, a buyer is like a fingerprint. There's no two that are exactly identical. And so there's no home builder that are doing precisely no home builders that are doing precisely the same thing.
Right.
And at the end of the day, everybody wants the consumer to get, what they want, to have a good experience.
Hmm.
And it's, the largest purchase they're ever going to make in their life. And so, it needs to be done right.
Hmm.
And if you've got, a buyer that is very particular, there are some builders that are willing to go into the weeds and comb through that and really, spend hours a day hammering all of those details out. And then there are some home builders that are just like, well, that element of the build process is not really how I do things.
Right.
So you should go talk to this guy.
Hmm.
And so we try to do a little bit of matchmaking. And the thing is, our metro typically establishes or creates 7,000 new households a year. And in order to maintain a healthy housing market, you basically need one unit of housing added for every household that's formed. And so if we're building or starting, 4 or 5,000 homes, single family homes or duplexes or triplexes or quads or whatever, would be, considered a single family home, whether it's either owned or rented, we're still short of,
Hmm.
of what it is that we need. So it's not necessarily like, well, I'm going to have to grab a hold of this would be buyer and hold on to them for dear life because there won't be any more housing need if I let them go and I won't be able to make a living. The housing need is too great
Right.
for that to happen.
You did bring up the parade of homes, and because you're a client of ours,
Yeah.
not every guest on the podcast is a client. Some guests I don't even know personally, and we get to know them on the podcast. But we just wrapped up the parade of homes campaign commercial, which is about to hit air very, very soon. I do want to talk about what the parade is and what it includes.
So the Parade of Homes, which is the second largest parade in the entire country,
Really?
yes, behind only the Twin Cities, in terms of the number of homes available to the public. Parade of Homes is free of charge for the public to come out and see, more than 340 homes this spring, starting in the last week of April,
Hmm.
running through Mother's Day, to come out and all of the homes are open between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. 7 days a week to come out and see what new home construction looks like in Kansas City, to interact with the neighborhoods, to see the communities. What would my commute be like if I bought in this
Right.
neighborhood? And then if I bought in this neighborhood, what would my housing circumstances look like? And so it's really kind of a recognition that people are very visual in their decision making. You can talk about something with a rendering or something that's
Hmm.
conceptual or theoretical, but when you show them, they're like, Okay, now I know what you're talking about. That's
Right.
what I'm talking about. And
That's why
so
we window shop.
that's right. And why we go try things on. You
Uh-huh.
can't buy all your clothes online.
Uh-uh.
You got to go see, well, how's this going to fit? Because we're all built differently.
Uh-huh.
Well, we all have different wants and needs when it comes to where we live. And so the Parade of Homes is really the ability for the individual home builders within the HBA to say, this is what we've got. Come take a look. And if you don't see anything here that would suit your needs perfectly, why don't in it, but there's enough here to start a conversation. Why don't we sit down and talk about building you something exactly the way that you want it? And so it's really just breaking down the barriers because people think, oh man, I'd love to build a house, but that sounds like a heck of a process. I don't know if I've got that in me. I'm too busy. Kids have soccer, whatever it is. It's a way to break down the barriers and say, wait a minute, these guys are going to do all the work. I just have to, pick out colors and where I want that window or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just to kind of lower that barrier to entry to actively considering new construction as the next place you want to live. So
Mm-hmm.
the Parade of Homes is a way to make it real for people and not necessarily just flip through a catalog and like the Sears wish book and say, boy, it'd be good if I checked every box on that page. I hope Santa brings me that like we did when we were kids. I lament the fact that there's no Sears wish book for my kids anymore. Now they just peek over my shoulder, try to get Alexa to bring up Amazon or something like that so they can do their own shopping. But it's just a way to make housing real and accessible to people. And like I talked about, this being a fragmented home builders market, it's a way for all of these builders to be able to invest in something that's going to elevate them all, to have
Mm-hmm.
a buy-in for something that is exceedingly popular and the model for all Parade of Homes across the country. It's really a unique thing to Kansas City. You talk to HBAs in other markets, and they say, "Oh, we're gonna have a big parade this year. We've got 30 homes." It's like, man, if we had 30 homes in our parade, that would be a five-alarm fire
Right.
alarm going off in our organization. So we've just got a very unique thing, and we just want the people of Kansas City to recognize how fortunate they are to have access to, essentially an open house of 340 plus houses on steroids.
How did our parade get so big? I mean, is that an effort of you and Carrie's team? Is that a collaboration between yourself and local realtors or builders, all the above?
As I said earlier, we've been doing this since 1947.
So it's longevity.
So clearly, Carrie and I probably didn't have much to
Right.
do with
Right.
with it at the outset. But I think what has happened is that the builders that participate in the parade do see a return. They see actual people that are interested in what they have to offer, and they create connections with people. And so
So advertising works.
yeah, exactly. And with anything in business, right? It's about ROI. What's going to be your return on that investment?
Thank you, Carrie.
And so,
Carrie English is off camera.
yeah,
She's laughing.
she should be the one on camera. But the thing is that once you've got people recognizing that the parade is how you build connections with individual people, how you cut through the noise
Mhm.
and start having meaningful conversations, then it
Makes it
becomes
real.
yeah, then it becomes a risk for not participating in it. And am
Yeah.
I going to have access to those people?
Mhm.
So longevity is certainly a component of it, but I think it's just the ongoing success from a business standpoint that it generates.
I want to go into your past because it's awesome.
Okay.
Um, and I've known this about you, I think, since we met, but I want the story to be told on the podcast because I think sometimes there's one story or one thing or a hobby or trait or whatever it is that you can tell or explain to another person about someone, and it immediately describes their character or the amount of temerity they have or gravitas, however you want to say that. And you're wearing your boots today. So you know what story I want to hear?
Right.
Okay.
So I have been wearing boots with my suits since the second day of, or really the second day of my professional career. So I graduated from K-State in 2007, and I was riding the escalator up to my job my new job on Capitol Hill on my first day, and I'm wearing my dress shoes, which were laced shoes. And here I am, a kid from a small town in western Kansas, riding the big, scary, moving metal staircase, which is the escalator up from the metro in D.C. And my shoelaces came untied. It was June, so I was sweaty when I tied them, so I didn't do a good job apparently. My shoes came untied, got caught in the escalator, and ripped them apart. And so I'm like, okay, I'm showing up to my first day of work looking like a kind of a vagabond here, like a dog got into my loafers or something like that. And I started thinking, what am I going to do? I've got one pair of shoes. I sold my car to be able to put down a deposit on an apartment. So I went there with no car, moved there with 2 suitcases. I hadn't been paid yet. So I'm like, okay, what can I sell to get a new pair of shoes today
Uh-huh.
so that I can come to work tomorrow? Well, I did have one other pair of shoes, and I had a gray suit. So I was like, well, I can wear these brown boots, these work boots that I've had for years, and maybe I'll just get by until I get another pair of dress
Uh-huh.
shoes. I walked in second day, and the congressman I was working for at the time looked at my boots and said, "Love the boots." And I said, "I've made it. I did it. I've cracked the code. This is now the new me." And some like ancillary benefits of that was, DC is just caked in marble,
Uh-huh.
tall, echoing
Hmm.
hallways. And so
It's always
you
clean.
could hear me coming from no matter where you were in the Capitol complex, you could hear me coming because I'm also a heavy guy. Heavy guy in loud shoes, man. That was a freight train coming through the US Capitol. But if I was with a group of people that I was escorting to another office for another meeting, or something like that, and I'd be walking them through, everybody in the Capitol or in the office buildings would turn around and take a look at me. And it's like, so they thought I was somebody. They're like, "Oh man, look, the guy that we're with is commanding this attention in the United States Capitol." And it was just because I got my shoes torn up by the escalator on my first day of work. So, you just go with what works. And that worked out for me. So it's kind of a funny story. So now I'm just a guy in suits and boots.
And you're wearing them today.
I'm wearing them today.
Are you brand loyal?
You know, uh, I was in my earlier days. Now that, I'm on the cusp of 40, I'm, more about comfort than anything. So my boot styles have changed. I've gotten a
Okay.
little bit wider toe,
Yeah.
you know,
But the
feet
boot
are pointed.
industry as a whole is getting away from the pointed toe.
That's true.
They're going square and broad.
That's true. So,
Hmm.
there's a story. Lee Majors was an actor,
Hmm.
years and years ago, and he was on one of the late night shows, and the host complimented him on his boots, and so he's there on TV, and he said, "Yep, they're from the Olath Boot Company." And so Olathe
Olathe.
Boot Company. And so that was like, the perfect mispronunciation of Olathe. The universal mispronunciation of Olathe was right there on national television. So I thought, when I got the job with the HBA here, if the Olath Boot Company ever comes back into fruition, I'll be their first customer.
I remember when we had those big tornadoes come through in the early 2000s, I think it was. And someone nationally was covering our area because of the tornado. And I remember how they pronounce Sedalia and Chillicothe. And those are some tough ones, man, if you're not
That's
from
right.
around here. But I remember Sedalia was Sedalia. Because it even took me a minute. Where's Sedalia? I'm like, oh, wait a minute. She's pointing to Sedalia. Okay. And I forgot how Chillicothe was pronounced, but we can take guesses there because that's a tough one if you see the spelling. Or Shoto traffic away. That's all.
Yes.
I've heard specifically foreigners say, "Really, you want us to spell Shoto traffic way?" And I probably couldn't even spell that right now. It's like spelling Albuquerque.
Right.
Um,
Just write the first couple letters and then scribble it and hope they get the gist.
put a Q in there somewhere towards the end.
Right.
So, was this when your first day in D.C.? Was that when you were working for Senator Moran?
Yeah, it was then
Or he wasn't? I was
then
going to say he wasn't a senator yet.
correct.
What did you do for him? Because you were with his office for quite some time.
Hmm. So I started out, my path after college, I wanted to get back to rural America. My dad is a mechanic. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I'm the oldest of six. And so that was a really it was the only way of life that I really knew. My hometown has 1,800 people in it, Plainville, Kansas, 20 miles north of Hayes, out in northwest Kansas. And I thought,
Is that where Superman's from, Tim?
Smallville-ish.
Smallville.
Yep,
He said Plainville. I was
Plainville.
close.
Yeah, very, very close.
I get some superhero points on that one. Tim's my comic go-to.
Okay. Well, it's good to have a comic guy,
Well,
right?
I mean, not comedy. Well, comedy relief, yes, but you're into yes.
Yeah. Right. So, I think that the key for me was what can I do to go to college? I'm a first generation college student. What can I do to contribute to the place that I grew up? What does it need? I was like, well, I'm not going to be a farmer because my family weren't farmers. My dad wouldn't allow me to be a mechanic because he said this is a dumb line of work. You got to have a computer science degree to work on cars anymore. And I wasn't going to work in the oil field.
Hmm.
Oil field and agriculture. Those were the
Right.
two main industries. So I thought, well, I'm going to go to law school. That'll be my path to be able to go back and be the county attorney, the city attorney, and work on land deals and, make sure people get the value out of their hard work. Make sure they don't get taken advantage of. And so, after K-State, I was going to take a year off between high school and law school anyway. And the phone rang, and I had done an internship in then Congressman Moran's Hayes district office, Hayes, Kansas, just 20 miles away from where I grew up. And he called and said, "Hey, we're getting ready to do the 2007 Farm Bill. It'd be great to have somebody that we know that can communicate some of these things to rural America, to take feedback, just kind of be the one of the go-to guys to help us manage all of the stuff that's going on." And so I said, "Okay." And so I moved out there and just did it. So from when I got that phone call to when I moved to DC was about 3 weeks. So it was a pretty quick turnaround. And so in DC, I was the guy that was sorting mail, and they still got physical mail. So I was making sure that people got, responses to their questions, and made sure that people felt heard and were heard. The congressman would always, ask for a daily mail report. What emails did we get? What letters did we get? What phone calls did we get? I want to hear from people.
Hmm.
And so that was I was just kind of the concierge to the constituency. And, as the years went on, I was I never asked for more responsibility. I was just given it because when you're the oldest of six and you grew up in a gas station and garage in rural America, there was no job descriptions. You just did what needed to be
Hmm.
done, and you knew that if it didn't get done, we'd be worse off if it didn't get done. But it's also not anybody's job to do it, so you just as well do it. And so I just kind of became that guy on Capitol Hill and for Congressman Moran. And so I had some really cool experiences working in the House of Representatives. Ran into very interesting and powerful people, interacted with, some of the movers and shakers and people that we would all know. And then I moved back to Kansas for 6 months to help with the then congressman's campaign in 2010 to become a United States Senator. And I thought, hey, I found my path back to Kansas. This is I was going to go out there for a year, wound up, at that time 2.5 years. It was a little extended stay than I was planning on.
Hmm.
And then he asked me to come back and be on his Senate staff. And so I said, okay, this is the last time. Seriously, it's going to be like a year or two, and then I'm really coming home. I'm serious about it this time. 6 weeks after I got back from the Senate campaign, I met my now wife, and she was working for the Washington football team at the time. It's been renamed a couple
Okay.
times. She was working for
Okay.
its original name.
The
Um,
national team.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. The Washington football team, now the Commanders, and
Hmm.
their previous name. And we met at a basement bar in Chinatown in DC, and we hit it off. And I was like, well, I better stick around a little bit longer. And it was, 8 more years. And then my wife is from Baltimore, and went to high school and college in South Florida, zero ties to the Midwest. And we finally, made it to the Midwest. So it was it was always one thing after another that kept me tied to DC.
Hmm. And in DC, you worked in housing, in transportation. In what other areas? I haven't.
Yeah, so for 2 years, I was the subcommittee staff director for the Housing, Transportation, and Urban Development Subcommittee for the Senate Banking Committee. So that was where, the national housing policy took place, and that was mostly programmatic things through housing and urban development.
Is that where you got to meet Jamie Dimon?
It was. So, you
I think
know,
that's pretty cool.
yeah,
Another thing I will never forget about you.
yeah, like Jamie Dimon, Ken Griffin, Brian Moynihan, all of those CEOs you see
They're not as cool as
during
Jamie,
earnings
though.
calls, I mean, not as notorious as Jamie probably. But I would always geek out in those conversations, because I was the guy that didn't know anything and everyone knew I didn't know anything. So I could ask the questions that everyone wanted the answers to, but didn't want to look dumb. And I just was genuinely curious about things.
Sure.
So I'd get to pipe up in those meetings and ask those questions and gain an understanding about how they're approaching things. I was there for congressional investigations. When Wells Fargo got in some trouble for creating consumer accounts,
Mhm.
we were part of that investigative team that dug into that. That had a pretty hefty federal fine for the way that they had conducted their business, and so it was never um, a Republican or Democrat game for me, just because I was always a policy guy. Does this stuff work or does it not? This is not about putting points on the board for any one particular team or another. We're here to represent people that just want government to work for them and want it to provide a return for the, amount of taxes that they pay. And so it that was such a peek behind the curtain for me, with regard to housing, because a lot of people think, well, if we just pass this program or this tax credit, housing is going to explode and all of our problems will be solved. And it was just kind of during that time as a subcommittee staff director, charged with organizing all of the housing perspectives within the Senate Banking Committee, that I just realized, we're not creating housing. It's the communities and the people on the ground and the guys swinging hammers. They're the ones that are making housing happen. So that's where I kind of, started my affinity for the construction industry and the people that
Okay.
somehow made this work.
So that started while you were still in politics.
Yeah.
Because that is one thing I was very curious about is how you transitioned from a, a nice career in politics in DC to Kansas City, KCHBA. Because there's no doubt that what you went through and learned and the knowledge you gained there, both in DC and in Kansas, working for, the congressman and then the senator, um, that's benefiting you to date. But how did that happen? Did Carrie make a phone call? And she had hunting one day, came across your profile and realized I need to get this man's attention.
You know, it was really, well, first off, I initiated with
You did?
the HB. Yeah. So in the spring of 2018, um, we had my wife and I had two kids. They were, at that time, my daughter had just turned 3 and my son had just turned 1. And I was the legislative director for Senator Moran. So I was putting in crazy hours. We're, at that point, a little more than a year into the Trump presidency.
Hmm.
Things were just, DC was just enormously chaotic.
What do you
And
mean?
so you're gonna when you say dive into my past, we're not gonna dive into all of the past, right?
No, we don't need
But
to.
no, it was well documented time of turbulence
Right.
in DC, and we knew that with our daughter having just turned 3, we were gonna need to start thinking about where's she gonna go to school, where are we gonna be long term. And my wife had moved to Florida. Her family had moved to Florida when she was in the 8th grade. And she didn't want to have to move our kids once we started school. So wherever my
Makes
daughter
sense.
started kindergarten, that's where we were going to be. So we really did a pretty thorough assessment of our life and what we wanted, and whether or not we could get that in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. We lived 12 miles south of the city, right near Fort Belvoir in Alexandria, Virginia, so south of Old Town. And those 12 miles were 90 minutes in the car each way. So you're talking about 25 miles round trip for a total of 3 hours. So all of our family time, all of our conversations, everything was done in the car.
Hmm.
And we're just like, this is not, the type of family interactions or lifestyle that we wanted.
Hmm.
And so we thought, is there something better? Is there something different? We could go anywhere in the country. Where's the best place that we can think of that we can raise our family, grow our family? And it took me two Zillow listings with the zip codes crossed out. I edited a Zillow listing, took a screenshot, and sent them over to my wife. She goes, "Oh my God, where's this at?" I said, "That is a place called Overland Park, and the other one is a place called Lee's Summit." And she goes, "Okay, where are those at?" "Well, they're both in the Kansas City metro." She goes, "Let's go.
Two different states,
Let's
though.
go." She goes, "How are the schools?" Couldn't be any better
Hmm.
from a public school standpoint. That was important to us because if we were going to be in the suburbs of DC, chances are, to give our kids the type of opportunity we thought, would be best for them, it was going to be a private school route.
Hmm.
And I didn't want to go downtown K Street,
Right.
to get the paycheck in order to provide that kind of lifestyle. That's not what I wanted to be. And so I was like, okay, I'm a civil servant. My wife worked for the Smithsonian by that time.
Okay.
She went to work for the Smithsonian after she left the football team. And so, she's working for a nonprofit. I'm working for the government. That's not a salary combination that's necessarily going to lend itself to private school. So we're like, what are we going to do? So public school was our priority. And you can't find better public schools in the country than you can
Had she
in Kansas
visited
City.
Kansas City or your hometown of Kansas
Oh,
before coming here?
oh yes. So she was treated to a big small town Western Kansas
Uh,
sibling wedding. My sister got married before we did.
Okay.
And
In your hometown?
yeah, in my hometown.
Okay.
So my now wife, girlfriend at the time, still talked to me. So I was like, okay, she didn't hate it. Either that or she really loves me. Chances are she just didn't hate it. So, all of our interactions with Kansas City were just kind of flying in, flying out, maybe a wedding or two, a social group. And then we had some friends from DC that moved to Kansas City. To one of the wife of the couple went to KU Law School. So we thought, so she knew someone all of a sudden in
Hmm.
Kansas City. Well, then it
That
turns out,
softens the blow.
yeah, right. And so we looked at it and we thought, you know what? If we don't do it, we won't do it. And so we just moved. And
Before you had the job.
my wife is so much better than me. I mean, more talented, smarter. I mean, you name it, she's got me. I can eat more than her, but that's about it. And so she got a job within 2 weeks. I mean, she just got scooped up, and she's still with the same company today.
Okay.
And so I had worked in politics for almost 12 years at that point, and I'm like, I don't even have a resume. I haven't even shopped around. I haven't done
Hmm.
any of this stuff. So we just did it. We just rented an apartment, moved two kids into an apartment, and I commuted back and forth to DC for 6 months.
Oh
So I
man.
was on a flight, the first flight out on Monday and the last flight back on Thursday. And I did that every week for 6 months. And it just that wears on you.
Hmm.
And um so we have two little kids at the time. They're in a new city. My wife's in a completely different place, and I'm gone. And I told her, on the Friday morning when I got, when we woke up, I said, I'm sorry, I'm putting you through this, being away like this. And she said, well, I don't really recognize the difference because I was always away when we were in DC too. Keeping long hours and
Working
kids going to
12-hour
bed at
days.
7:30 and all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. So then I was like, okay, we gotta change some stuff. So
Mhm.
something's got to give. Something's got to
Mhm.
happen in Kansas City. And it was literally later that morning that I saw the HBA was looking for an executive vice president. I was like, wait a minute, housing policy in Kansas City? This place is this place is 13 minutes away from where we're currently sitting. This is it. I mean,
On state line.
it was a
Right.
sign, and I'm just incredibly fortunate to have landed where I landed. So I just tell people, hey, I'm what I want to be when I grow up. Now I just got to grow up.
Well, it's obvious when you meet you, and especially if you have a chance to sit down and have a lengthy conversation with you, that there's a work ethic that's built into you that's innate. And you've unpacked all of that here. And I appreciate that. I do want to come back to the HBA, but before I do that, I want to go back to the early days of Will, because I read something that really intrigued me, and that is your time with the controlled burn.
Oh yeah.
I want to talk about that.
Some guys have these glory days flashbacks, whether it was, high school football, getting a sack or, hitting a home run. One of my glory days flashbacks is what you've just described.
The controlled burns.
Yes.
Was it just in the Flint Hills?
Yes.
And anyone who doesn't know what a controlled burn is, just go ahead and tell them.
Yeah. So I worked for the Long-Term Ecological Research, LTER, which was a division of the K-State Biology Department. So in partnership with the Nature Conservancy, the Kanza Prairie is an enormous preserve of virgin tallgrass prairie. 90% of existing tallgrass prairie that is still virgin in the world is in the Flint Hills of Kansas City, or in the Flint Hills of Kansas. And so what we did for the biology department is it was all sectored off. So some places were burned every year. Some places were burned every other year. Some places were burned every 5, 10, 20, and some places were never burned.
Okay.
So it was all sectioned off.
Mm-hmm.
So you could measure how biomass responded to those ancient, prairie fires that came through. What came back the fastest, to what degree, how
Is
quickly.
that why it's done?
Mm-hmm. But that's why it's done there. So it was just to study the effect of fire on tallgrass prairie and how the environment responded to those lightning strikes that typically started those, before there was any people.
So it's not done for purposes of the soil being revitalized or for the prairie itself to regrow. It's done to study.
So at LTER on the Kanza Prairie, it was done to study. It was scientific.
To this day, is it still done?
It is still done. And so
No, I know it's still done, but is that still why they perform it?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. But in other portions and on privately held portions of the tallgrass prairie, it is done for both soil quality, as well as to
Cleaning house.
well, yeah, to keep out the invasive species.
Mhm.
Trees are the biggest, I guess, predator on the prairie. Those cedar trees, they're basically like weeds. They choke out all of the stuff that's actually nutritious for the wildlife. And so we called those forbs. Anything that was not grass was called a forb. And so you'd burn the prairie because it would get rid of everything, and then the grass would be the first thing to come back. And so that's usually why the prairie is burned, is because if you can control it, then you aren't susceptible to a burn becoming uncontrollable, where there's a fire where you didn't want one to be.
Right.
And so that comes down to, just land management practices. There's a tremendous amount of federally owned land around the country, and the Bureau of Land Management, does the management of those. And the purpose of managing the land is so that you can maintain essentially a healthy environment where you're less susceptible to fires.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't take care of the land, the fire is going to happen anyway, because fires have been happening for eons.
And you're getting that feedback, that scientific or whatever type of testing and studying they're doing pre and post fire. And
Absolutely. And so how we did those control burns was you could shape the fire.
I'm listening.
And so we had what were called drip torches. So I think why I really liked this, because I got to put on this big heavy suit and this cool helmet and this breathing apparatus and feel like I was actually, doing something other than arts and sciences in college. And it would have a kind of a low grade propane in it, and you would drag this torch behind you in a certain shape. And then we had
Okay, hold on. Don't rush over the drip torch. because that's gold here.
So you would have, I mean,
Carrie, it's,
you,
so it's
this
like
could
it's a
this couldn't have been lower tech. It was a canister
uh-huh.
on the end of a pole, and the propane dripped down to the end, and you lit with a lighter the
Uh-huh.
end of that drip torch, so the propane would go.
And just kind of lay on the ground
And
there. And
so it was designed so that when you were walking, the propane would drip out, so you could light a fire in a
okay.
straight line. So that way it wasn't just, starting a fire and hoping it goes in the direction you want it to.
Right.
So if you stationed all of your drip torch guys in a certain direction and had them all walk a certain way, you could shape the fire. And then you had the water cannons and the water trucks to make sure it stayed that way. And then the fire would burn almost in a circle towards itself. So if you had the drip torches in a circle, the fire would burn towards itself and then it would run out of fuel. And so
That's the ideal scenario.
correct. And so that was always, the ideal. And obviously it can be windy out on the prairie.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why those water cannons were necessary, is to keep the fires where they were supposed to be. But those controlled burns were just breathtaking. I mean, magnificent to see the power
Yeah.
and the fury of those.
Last time I drove to Wichita, we have a client in Wichita, and I was driving there, and it was during a burn or a set part of a burn because you could see the plumes on each side of the highway and you could obviously smell it. But there's a whole science and method behind it. And I know that, but I don't know that, but I know there has to be.
Yeah.
Because it's more than, I grew up on 70 acres in Parkville, and our version of a controlled burn was dad, doing a strike anywhere match and letting it go. And then when the sun went down, he'd look at his binoculars to make sure he didn't see embers. And if he did, he'd send me out on my dirt bike because I could get there quicker in the dark than he could on foot.
Yeah.
Hope it was out the next day before it spread to the neighbors' land.
Well, what we were doing was a little bit more structured than what you're describing.
Much more, yeah.
But as magnificent as those fires were, you could really appreciate the importance of having that kind of fire science and knowing how to prevent those kinds of things in the future, and then learning from the fire. But it may sound bizarre to say, but my favorite part was always the end. Lighting the fire was always the most nerve-wracking, but it was when that fire came into that full circle, and it was just like exactly how you'd imagine. That fire comes together and it just goes, and that's just smoke and no fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like it puts itself out,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd walk it to make sure it stayed there, and
Mm-hmm.
you had your spray gun to put out any stragglers. And then, sometimes if we were burning a sector that was right next to one of those that was not to ever be burned, so you could measure
Mhm.
the biomass accumulation there, you had to just constantly spray your cannon up in the air, back and forth, waving it like a wand to knock down the embers that might have blown from the part you were burning.
So
It was-
you were
it was
both
quite an operation.
the fire starter and the fire preventer.
I did both.
You had a drip torch,
Yep.
and then you had a hose.
Yes, but not at the same time.
Okay,
No,
that's the impression I was getting.
yeah. So that you couldn't Rambo those.
I didn't. Why didn't
The beginning.
well, you never know. I don't want
Yang.
to. I don't want to underestimate you, but
There was one pretty dramatic episode one time where a fire did jump into one of those really high density biomass areas.
Mhm.
And so it leaped a creek bed and landed in there and just immediately started taking off. And we were trained to just drop our water guns, which were connected to the water truck, so the water truck could drive up to the spot. And for whatever reason, I thought, I can keep up with this truck. And I did. I was at a dead sprint for 200 yards, which, I played high school football, but by that time it had been a lot of time since I'd done any cardio. And I kept up with the truck. And so, but the person driving the truck didn't know I was still there. So they were getting out, and I ran right past them, still holding my water cannon. And I jumped over the creek, which, was a small creek. I don't want to make it sound like I, jumped over a river, but I jumped over the creek, and I barrel rolled through the fire in my flame retardant vest, and I came up on one knee and just went 360 degrees, and I put it out. And I kind of came out of the smoke. My eyebrows were smoldering. My eyes were blood red at that time. And I came out and like everyone else was like, but the driver of the truck just tore me a new one. I had broken every
Right.
vehicle. That was my last burn. But
Because of
I
that?
didn't get fired. They just didn't call me back when they were ready to do the next
Really?
one. Yeah, because it's like, but I saved the prairie. It's just like, forget the prairie, man. Do you know how much our insurance is
Right.
gonna go up if they knew you were cowboying it out here like this? So, it was so my friends and I, we had planned to go to the Royals game that night, drive from Manhattan to go to the Royals game because it was dollar night. So we
Okay.
went to every dollar night we could. And so we pulled up to Kaufman and just black stuff starts coming out of my nose. All of the cinder and stuff that I had inhaled finally came out a couple hours later. So I'm standing in line for hot dogs, and it looks like I've just, like had my face in a coal pile. And the guy standing in line next to me, waiting on our dollar hot dogs, is like, "Dude, you should go wash your face." Go wash your face. What are you talking about? There's no mirrors in the concession line at the K, and I'm a 20-year-old know-it-all. And I was just like, oh
And
yeah,
your buddies aren't going to tell you right away.
terrible. I look like an extra on Zoolander. It's like, I don't know what happened here. It's like, yeah, do I have black lung? I don't know how this works. And so it took a full week to get all that smoke out of my hair and
Oh,
out of my
really?
lungs and everything. Yeah,
Did you feel okay?
yeah, I was fine. I was fine. I was also 20, so I never really
Sure.
felt
Well,
fine. I didn't live a very healthy lifestyle. So it's like nothing a little, 2 a.m. Chinese food can't fix.
and a dollar night at the K
Right.
or Kaufman at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's another essential Will story. Chasing the fire or chasing the water truck.
And it's something that I will never tell my kids about because I don't want them to think it's okay. I
Well,
would be,
no, because they're going to be in your
I,
backyard
you
tonight.
know what? My wife will send this podcast to my parents.
Okay.
I'm just terrible at that kind of stuff. And they're going to be like, I've never heard that story. It's like, well, it was 20 years ago, so you can't still be mad at me. But the reason I didn't tell them a story is moms don't like to hear that kind of
Your
stuff.
parents don't know about this?
No.
We won't tell anyone.
Well, if this becomes a tell-all about everything my parents don't know about me, this is going to be a long episode.
I saw that in your history, and I thought that is really, really, really interesting. Because if you live in Kansas City long enough, you see that type of thing. Let alone if you've lived on land, you've gone through that sort of thing, and just to have the controlled part explained.
And here's one of the tricks that I do because I can bring everything back to housing, and
Okay.
that's just the way I roll, how I'm wired. A couple of years ago, there were some fires in Southern Oregon called the Alameda fires, and it took out quite a few single-family owner-occupied homes. And when the insurance adjusters came by, um, they were only returned about 70% of the total replacement value of their houses because the cost of building materials had gone so far up. And there was a delta between what their homes would cost to rebuild compared to what they were insured for. And so these were people that had lost everything in the fire that were now having to come up with $50,000 in cash just to get back what they had lost. And so, you think about wildfires and why you do control burns and why you manage land. Part of it does come back to, where we build and how we build and thinking about those things. So, as building materials continue to increase, the cost of housing continues to go up. And if insurance policies are not kept up with or not modernized based on, current replacement value, there's an exposure there.
Isn't it, educate me, but isn't the rebuild value supposed to be 150% of the house? Isn't that, I thought that was a standard,
You
if
know,
a such standard exists.
it's one of those things where insurance has been regulated at the state level
Okay.
for 150 years.
Okay.
There's technically a federal insurance office underneath the United States Treasury, but that's mostly for international insurance products. The state insurance commissioners are the pretty much the end all be all for insurance regulation. So it's going to vary by state.
Is that why, like, last year in California when they had too much rain for California, and it had all the mudslides, and you saw insurance carriers straight up leaving areas. And I forget specific areas right now, but leaving, Van Nuys, California, or not insuring Toluca Lake, California, because it's just simply too big of a risk. We're not going to do it. We're not going to honor our policy. We didn't know that we were not supposed to get this much rain.
Right.
Dubai a day ago got 4 inches of rain in one day. They got their yearly rain total in one day. No one knew that was going to happen.
No, I mean,
They don't even
it's
get
an
rain like
incredibly
that.
difficult thing to do, is to kind of price that future risk. And how do you collect enough premium to, you know, totally account for all of your exposure? It's a hard thing to do, and something our country is really going to have to grapple with, because you're describing those carriers departing California. Same is true in Florida, and it's going to continue to happen elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Have we had any such scenarios like that in Kansas City?
I haven't seen that. Our risk is a little bit more moderate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that it's really hard to envision a replication of that in our market. That's usually, it's almost like thinking like the National Flood Insurance Program, which is an insurance product that you're required to have if you have a mortgage that is backed by the federal government. Technically, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, secondary mortgage
Mm-hmm.
market. So if you owe somebody money for your house, you have to carry flood insurance if you're in a specific zone. And so, there are flood zones in Kansas City,
Mm-hmm.
but it is not the entirety of the metro.
Right.
Whereas you've got, metros and states that are basically all floodplain. So I think that our natural disaster exposure is non-zero, but it's not as susceptible to some of those big swings that we see in some of those coastal areas.
Do you miss politics?
No,
You don't?
no, no. Well,
Assuming you didn't have to travel, do you miss politics?
no. So the allure for me and for politics, the draw to politics, was just, maybe it was a little bit Pollyanna-like, in the sense that I wanted to get to the right conclusion and help everyone else arrive at the right conclusion, and it didn't have to be my conclusion.
Mm.
I didn't have to be right. I just wanted to be part of it. Um, that's that.
Politics isn't always about concluding.
It's not, and I'm about outcomes. You can work like crazy and put in a lot of effort,
Mm-hmm.
but if you don't get the outcome, what have you really done?
Mm-hmm.
And so outcomes are hard to achieve in politics.
Mm-hmm.
And I answered your question, do I miss politics? Because I don't miss politics. I've never actually liked politics. I like policy. But you have to have politics in order to get to determine who makes the policy. You can't have one without the other. Politics is just the process by which we decide who gets power.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that if I wanted to do policy, I had to be political. But given the preference, I want to work on the policy, and I want to work with people who
Mm-hmm.
want to work on policy. Um, so I am political in a sense that I recognize that policy, the outcome, is really what matters. So I will do what I have to do in order to make sure the policy yields the best result for the most amount of people.
Which is why you're a perfect fit at the HBA. No, seriously.
Well, I like working for people who work for a living.
Mm-hmm.
People that don't want to spend a lot of time hemming and hawing about every little thing. At the end of the day, they want to provide for their families, and the people that I work for, how they provide for their families is putting roofs over the heads of their neighbors. That's just a very noble and humbling thing to be a part of. And the fact that they're all small businesses, I look back at my parents' business, Rooter Oil Company in Plainville, Kansas. We don't have a website, so you
Okay.
can't look it up. But Rooter Oil Company, my dad is a sole proprietor, throwing around truck tires his entire adult life. I always thought, what would it be like if somebody could fight his battles for him that would help him sleep better at night and make it more likely that he can provide for our family and me and my siblings? And so I just kind of apply that approach to my work with the HBA is I'm going to be the person my dad never had to tell his story so that he can sleep better at night, maybe provide for a better way of life, and maybe not have to have such a rough go of it. So my dad still owns the garage. He's still doing the work. He would never allow himself, neither of my parents, my mom or my dad, would ever allow themselves to say, to be, categorized as victims in any way. Everything has happened the way that they would be okay with.
Hmm.
But as a kid, I saw that and I thought, you know what? I can be that guy for other people. And so that's how I see myself as the head of the HBA is how do I speak up for the people that don't know how to speak up? They've got a compelling story. They just need it told by somebody that gets paid to tell that story and actually believes the story.
Hmm.
It's not purely a paying gig where I'll say whatever needs to be said because that's where the paycheck comes from. I'm the kind of guy that needs to believe what's being said because, you know, the small town roots, your reputation is everything.
Hmm.
So I'm going to do what I say and say what I'm going to do. And I'm going to believe it.
And I'm going to bring it back to the controlled burn because, in a way, just like you got to see that burn go from the beginning to the very end, like you explained, where it's just a singular circle and poof, it's out. At the HBA, you can you can address an issue, create some standards, create a committee, and solve that and watch that come to a completion. Versus, as we alluded to in politics, you're going to get stuck in that wagon training process where all you do is wagon train because that's kind of the nature of politics.
Right.
Not bad, not for the worse, it's not for the better. That's how that works. That's how that industry is supposed to work. I'll just leave that there.
Mhm.
This isn't a political podcast. It can be if you want it to be, you
No,
know.
thanks.
But that's the way that machine runs, and it runs that way for a reason. Um, but it would make sense that that's appealing because again, you get to watch that loop get closed.
And it's very reflective of the industry that we serve. You don't get paid for trying to build a house. You get paid for building the house. It either gets done or it doesn't. So you buy the lot, you pour the foundation, you frame it, you get all the stuff put on it, you get it painted, you get your certificate of occupancy, and you move a family into it. And that's when, you see the financial reward for the months
Mm-hmm.
and maybe years of labor that you put into it. You don't get to the point where, you just kind of stop construction and say, well, I tried, where's my check?
Right.
You know, outcomes matter. And so that's just how people need a result. And
Well,
they
that's
need
the
the housing.
wrong approach to any occupation. I mean, if you wanted to blanket it like that,
Right.
but obviously, you're a different type of human. What time do you wake up in the morning?
It depends if I've got a kid with a fever or not.
Okay. No
Sometimes
fever.
no fever. I usually get up around 6.
Okay.
Yeah. So, um, my wife works out in the morning and goes off site out of the house to do that. And so I'm usually up at 6. I get showered. I start reading news, and then I just start making waffles. I make waffles like you wouldn't believe. I'm like Waffle House ain't got nothing on me.
Every morning?
My kids go through waffles like you wouldn't believe. And
So you
then
wake up and cook breakfast every morning?
yeah, we do breakfast together every morning
Nice.
that we can. We also
Waffle
try.
mix, frozen. I have to ask.
No, I'm a waffle mix guy.
Okay.
And then, sometimes it's Eggos. You got to switch it up a little bit.
Okay.
Never get too exotic because anything different, the kids will kind of reject. My
Okay.
kids are big breakfast meat people, sausage, bacon. I don't cook bacon or sausage. I usually cook a big batch on the weekends and then we use it
Okay.
through the week. But, it's important that as busy as we are, that we have those, kind of, hey, we're a captive audience here, all at the table, we're all together, and it's just that family unit, that time, because we don't know what the rest of the day is going to bring, so let's just start it out together. I tell people, um, when they ask me, that conversation always comes up, no matter what social setting you're in. So what do you do?
Hmm.
My answer has become, well, I'm a dad and I do this housing stuff on the side. That's what's most important to me.
Right.
And if my wife and I, screw up raising our kids, there's no reset button on that. Can't mess that one up. So that's what we pour everything into, is making sure that's being done the right way. And I'm just fortunate to, work for an organization and a group of people that have those same values, that it is about, family and taking care of yourself. So, there's stuff you can't account for. There's some, city council that's gone off the rails, or some planning commission that's decided to do something different than they've ever done. And then I got to go be Johnny on the spot and,
Mhm.
be in a city council chamber until 2 o'clock in the morning. That happens. But, it's that's life. We all have those things come up. So uh, at the end of the day, if I can be there and nobody else has to be, then that's just one less thing that my members have to face and go deal with. Because if they know, hey, these guys got my back.
That's where that politics comes in handy.
Yeah,
Carrie, has Will ever made waffles for anyone at the KCHBA? She's shaking her head no.
they have asked me to. We
Oh,
talked
you've
about
asked him to.
we talked about at the outset, of this, that I like to cook and do all that kind
Uh
of stuff.
huh.
And I will, in the staff meeting on Monday, sometimes be like, well, I made this week, and they're like, you couldn't do that here. We got a kitchen here. Like, it's like, well, I gotta have some other stuff going on, but if you want me to throw the apron on and
Will has some other stuff going
start
on.
burning some eggs, I could probably get it going. Set up a breakfast burrito bar. We can do that. But
Do you do dinner?
yeah, I cooked dinner too. Yeah, just
Okay.
braised some short ribs this past weekend.
Okay.
So my kids are good eaters. They like it all: meat, vegetables. They'll eat anything I put in front of them.
So you've been cooking. You said we started off the podcast. You said cooking is a hobby, but it sounds like the hobby has gone more than just waffles and ribs.
So it's hard to have.
You have a bread maker at home, don't you?
Oh yeah, I have a bread maker. I got a Instapot. I've got the air fryer. I mean, I've got all the gadgets.
Okay.
I've got a Blackstone. I got a grill. I got a smoker. I mean,
Okay.
it's just it's not movie quality stuff. Not stuff you're gonna see on a flyer at
Uh
Menards,
huh.
but it's all operable, and it gets me from point A to point B. But one of the things I kind of recognized is that, okay, I've got a kind of a demanding job. I got kids that are involved in every activity you can imagine, every night of the week until God knows when. What am I gonna do for fun? I got to cook anyway. I may as well have fun doing it. So it's a way to have fun and do something that needed to be done anyway. So a necessity turned into a hobby. I don't know if I talked myself into that. I don't know if this turned into a therapy session where we're getting down to some root causes of things. But
That'd be cool.
no, I like to cook, and what I really enjoy. I mean, clearly I like to eat, but one of the things I really enjoy is watching other people enjoy what I've made them, and that they didn't have to go through all the hassle that I did. And they're appreciative that I did all of that in order to get this really delicious result.
Again, reiterating your role at HBA, politics, helping people help themselves. Is there a dish that you're currently working on trying to master, perfect, or a dish that you've tried a few times and you just can't get?
So I'll never give up. That's a problem with me
I
sometimes,
can
is
tell.
that I will spend as much as my discretionary income will allow to keep buying really expensive cuts of whatever to
Uh-huh.
do something correctly. Um, this is obviously a Kansas City based podcast, so this is going to be really embarrassing to say. I cannot smoke a brisket. I cannot. I can smoke everything else. I can cook anything else. I mean, you should see my Bluetooth enabled sous vide. I got that baby going. I can make a steak you can cook with a fork, like a plastic fork in a kid's drawer. I cannot smoke a brisket and get it to
What
turn
do you
out
do
right.
to it?
Ruin it is what I've been doing. I can't get a smoke ring on it, so it doesn't look good. Yeah, it's just I don't even want to get into it. That's another podcast about trials and fails of Will's brisket escapades. But I like to succeed too. So
Mhm.
it annoys me that I've got this Achilles heel when it comes to barbecue, because I made some pork belly burnt ends the other day, and those were just like little pieces of bacon candy with covered in barbecue sauce, and they were amazing. I was like, why can't you beat brisket?
The
What did I do differently here? So
competitive nature of Will.
that's right. That's right. So I want to be good at what I do. I want to have fun while I do it, but I want to use those things because we've all got things that we really want to do but can't or haven't been able to yet. And it's motivating. Keeps me going.
I bet your wife loves that you cook.
Oh yeah, she adores it. It's it's awesome
Is
because
she your sous chef?
my daughter is my sous chef now.
Really?
Yeah, she loves being in the kitchen with me. She's 9.
Okay.
And so she'll chop stuff up. She wants to know, okay, why is this at the low temperature? Shouldn't it be higher? It's like, well, you can burn it. So we're talking about, talking through this kind of stuff. And I'm like, if I can teach my kids to feed themselves, I'll have accomplished something because they won't help me with the yard. They can't mow yet. They're terrible at physical labor because they're small and they complain. But man, if I can get them to help me cook, maybe I'll get a meal cooked for me sometime. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Carrie, do you have anything that you want to add? Okay. We can certainly move that camera around.
We're gonna do the director's cut after like
That's right.
true confessions of working for the HBA.
Will, what else? I mean, I've taken a lot of your time, but we've gone through a lot. This has been really, really good. What do you think? Did I miss it? Did I miss anything? Is there something that you want to say while we're here?
Well, having worked in the United States Senate for 9 years, I am skilled in the art of the filibuster. I can talk for a long time about nothing. But I feel like what we've covered has been pretty meaningful.
Hmm.
Um, it was probably more about me than I've ever talked about.
Really?
Because so I made my wife 3 promises when we got engaged. I said, you're my one and only. We're never going to be bored, and you're never going to see my name on a ballot. I'm never going to run for anything. Um, and part of that was my kind of aversion to fame or notoriety. I just want to go to Hy-Vee and walk down the aisles and do what I need to do and go home and cook whatever I need to cook.
Hmm.
So I don't I don't like talking about me. I'm not good at talking about me. But I appreciate the opportunity to maybe add a little bit of my personality to the context of what it is that I do for a living for the Home Builders Association.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, we're all people. We all have individual wants, desires, needs, skills, shortcomings, all of those things. And so, the HBA is not a faceless organization. I'm not a faceless executive or spokesperson for it. I'm a person, and the people I represent are people. They're individuals who love their families and want to build beautiful homes for their neighbors to live in. And so, if me talking about me puts a softer side on the residential construction industry, then I'll talk about me.
No, I really appreciate that, Will, because one, I didn't know that. And two, that as I explained before, the podcast is about you. It's not about me. It's not about advertising. It's not about even about your industry if you don't want it to be. That's why I asked you if there's anything you want to talk about it. If it's wrestling, if it's cooking, if it's, hey, I don't want to talk about work. I do that, 5 days a week or however many days a week. I want to talk about this. Then let's do that because this is your time.
It's ironic because I get home after a long day of talking for a
Mhm.
living, talking about housing, um, and I'll get asked the question, "Why are you so quiet?" Because I've said 50,000
I
words
said it
today.
all.
I'm listening. I'm engaged. I'm just out of gas. Um, and
I used all my words today.
and it's funny because we'll be at a kid's baseball game or softball game or volleyball or at the our pool in our neighborhood, and I'll just be off playing with the kids, and there will be people there that have seen me. Our kids go to school, have never heard me talk. They think I'm the quietest guy, the biggest wallflower, because I'm really not good at small talk. I
Really?
can be. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's an aversion to small talk. I don't know what it is, but I once you get me going, obviously,
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna talk. But there's a lot of people. It's like, you know what? I've never heard Will talk like that before. It's like, well, I guess we gotta get me out there more.
Right. Right.
But
Or invite them over for breakfast.
yeah, right. Just not too early. I
Yeah.
want to put on a good show. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, it's this has been a great experience, and I appreciate you being persistent and getting me to commit to come on.
I wanted you for so long. And it just turned out that you happen to be our first video recorded episode.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And as we talked about,
See if I'm your last.
well, I hope not. But what, a week ago, I said, yeah, if you jumped on earlier, it could have just been voice. But I'm lucky we got the chance to do video and audio.
Very good. Well,
So
happy to be your guinea pig. Experimentations, the spice of life.
now this has been awesome. I like to end every episode with a handshake. So let's go ahead and shake
All right.
hands and get out of here. Thank you, Will. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Little Agency That Roars podcast. Be sure to find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on FasoniPartners.com under podcast. Be sure to subscribe, be sure to like, and leave a review. If you want to submit an interview or submit yourself for an interview, please email roar@FasoniPartners.com. That's ROAR @FasoniPartners.com. Thanks.